would like to introduce to you Amy Hofer. She is the coordinator of the Statewide Open Education Library Services, is the OER librarian for Oregon's 17 community colleges. You can visit the Open Oregon Education Resources website at openoregon.org. She is a co-author of the forthcoming book, Transforming Information Literacy Instruction, Threshold Concepts in Theory and Practice. And, this is my favorite part, by night, Amy is a fiddler in square dance collar. Doesn't that sound fun? Amy.
So hi, I'm Amy Hofer. I'm here from Portland, Oregon. And while we get set up, I want to say I think I always want to follow cable from now on. I feel like the rabble is roused, and also you gave a nice preview of a couple of things that I'm going to be talking about in more depth. It's almost as if we planned it. And, while we're getting my presentation pulled up, I just want to say, like, cable's really great about the big picture, the global view, and OER can also be small steps. It can be very tiny steps. So has anybody actually put an open license on something that you've created? So have a personal open policy, right? Like put an open license on something. And what's nice about that is, we ask faculty to do this, but you will really quickly learn the questions that they have to ask, like what's your contract with your institution? Do you own the copyright, or does your college or university own the copyright? And if it's their copyright, how do you get permission to put an open license on something that you created? And how do you do the Creative Commons license chooser, and how do you then get it onto your document, and what do you want that to look like, and where do you want to put it, right? All of these questions, when we're asking faculty to do it, let's go ahead and try to do it ourselves next time you make a handout or a LibGuide or a website or whatever it is. Oh, thank you so much. Okay, so that's my plug for having a personal open policy. So, thanks so much for having me. It's really an honor to be here, and Oregon's 17 community colleges are making a lot of progress on reducing the cost of textbooks in all of the areas that are important to community colleges: career and technical education, lower division transfer, developmental, high school partnerships, full degrees and certificates, and high enrollment courses. There's momentum and enthusiasm, and there's also awareness of the need to consolidate the gains that we've made by taking a programmatic rather than an ad hoc approach. And I would say our biggest challenge is uncertainty of funding for statewide coordination to continue the progress that we've made so far. I've been in my job since January of 2015, and I was hired, it's a statewide position funded by the Community College and Workforce Development Office of the Higher Education Coordinating Commission on the recommendation of the Oregon Community College Distance Learning Association. And I report to Lynn Benton Community College, so I just confuse everybody by living in Portland and having a Lynn Benton email address and being in a statewide position. So I'm in a gray area. And this is just to show you the reason why OER is such a natural fit at Oregon's colleges. Because if you look at our mission statements and vision statements, the emphasis is always on access and student success. And these are just a few examples. This is our logo. It was donated by Lane Community College, and Open Oregon's mission statement is that we promote textbook affordability for community college students and facilitate widespread adoption of open, low-cost, high-quality materials. As we mentioned before, you can look at openoregon.org to get more information on all of this. And that's where we are tracking adoption and providing access to trainings, both in person and online, and funding for projects through grants and stipends, and also connecting people across the state that are working on similar projects. So a little bit about what Open Oregon does, and these slides are available to you, so don't worry about writing things down if you don't want to. And I'm going to talk about a few of these things in more detail, and I have left time for questions if there's something that you're hoping that I'm going to talk about and I don't touch on it. I also want to say that having a person whose job it is to be accountable to the goals of the program is essential. But at the same time, textbook affordability cannot be one person's job. We need a very deep bench of advocacy and expertise on every campus in order for students to really see an impact in terms of savings. And so that's why I'm trying to have as many ways as possible for people to be involved with Open Oregon and receive funding through Open Oregon. And I brainstormed a bunch of possible entry points here for this slide. I'm here to talk about what's going on in Oregon, and I'm going to give you some highlights. I'm going to talk about adoption data and grants data and research data. You might notice a theme. And then I'm going to talk a little bit about what the state's doing in terms of policy and some challenges that we face. So my really exciting data point is that all 17 of our colleges have at least one OER adoption. That's 100%. And I know that, I think I know that Florida is in a similar boat as Oregon in that you have different institutions that are really at different places in terms of textbook affordability and OER. And Oregon is the exact same way, and just to complicate things even more, our colleges and universities are not in a system. So I am working with each college, starting where they are, and just thinking about what is the next step that's appropriate to that campus and how can I help you get there. And because this looks different everywhere, this 100% is a really big achievement that I'm proud of, because for some colleges, having one adoption is a very big step. So this is where we are tracking some of our adoptions. This is a partial list, and it's at openoregon.org/resources. And Florida is really well known for your statewide repository of open resources. And in fact, I know that at least one Oregon instructor found an open theater textbook in the Florida repository. We requested that it be added to the open textbook library, and it's being used in an Oregon college, so thank you for sharing. And this page is different from a repository. So for one thing, it's a referatory. It shares links rather than storing content. And it also has a very narrow goal that a repository doesn't necessarily do. So what we're doing here is we're capturing data about who is using what, where we can share the link to the content that they've chosen to use. So we're not capturing savings data, we're not capturing anything else. And the reason for that is to have a very, very small ask of faculty when we have their attention to say, what are you using for your course? We want it to be really easy for them to answer that question. And the page, as I mentioned, this is a subset of known adoptions because it's just the one with the links to shareable content. I sometimes get submissions to this page where people say, I'm using a lot of different stuff from around the web, too many links to list here. That's great. Those students are saving money, and the college definitely wants to know that that's a zero-cost course. But I don't share that on the Open Oregon Resources page because it's not going to help anybody else figure out how to make their own course open. And I also say here, you're going to hear from Dave Ernst about the peer reviews in the Open Textbook Library. These aren't exactly peer reviews, they're peer endorsements. It's like, I'm using this, for better or worse. Here's just a screenshot of what the public sees. There's a little description of what the page does. There's a link to the forum where you can submit your own course. And there's a search box, and the nice thing about the search box is that it provides a URL to the search results, and then the list of resources. And here's an example from sort of the middle of the page of what that looks like. It's a long list. There are 360 entries here and counting. And as I said, all 17 colleges are represented at least once on the page. What you'll find here is a mix of open, copyright but free resources and library resources. And of course, we can't directly link to those, but if we cite a faculty member at another institution might be able to find that they have access, or it might be feasible to get access to that content. So, I will say this page started as a project that was sort of handed to me like, hey, why don't you get a bunch of librarians together over the summer to make OER subject guides? And my heart sank, because why do we need to recreate the wheel? Why does the end point of this project need to be a LibGuide when there are so many really, really good OER subject guides already out there? And the group went in this much more creative direction, and I'm so thrilled about that, because this list is totally unique. It's what's actually in use in Oregon's colleges. And it's powered on the back end by a Google form that dumps to a spreadsheet, and there's a little bit of code that makes the spreadsheet show up on the website, and that was written by Tamara Marnell, who's a librarian at Central Oregon Community College. I just want to say that, to me, one of the most important things happening on this page, if you look at the far right column, faculty can opt in to share their name and contact information. So that means if someone else wants to know, okay, I am teaching Writing 121, how does the instructor at the college down the road solve the problem of not assigning an expensive textbook? They can contact that person if they've agreed to share their information and say, okay, I see that you're using About Writing by Robin Jeffrey. How's it going? Do you like it? Do you have PowerPoint slides? Do you have quiz questions or assessments that you can share? Right? Like, it's also a way of connecting people that are doing similar work. And while we're talking about this page, I would also like to just normalize that it's really impossible to know everything that's going on, and that's actually the hardest part of my job, is that I'm charged with that. So, with data collection, I think it's really important not to let the perfect be the enemy of the good. It's really useful to share the information that we have, even if it's not totally 100% complete. So I want to talk a little bit about our grant data now, because, of course, one of the biggest drivers for adoptions is incentives and grants. And our grant program, the big number for our grant program is that in the last biennium, we saved students over $1 million, which is over $4 in student savings per program dollar spent. And I'm happy with that number, and it's going to improve over time, because those instructors are going to get their materials in front of more students. They're going to convince their colleagues to also adopt. So the impact of that initial investment will grow. 143 grantees from 21 institutions participated in redesigning 108 courses. So it was a big program in the last biennium. And just to tell you a little bit more about what we did, this was inspired by Affordable Learning Georgia's grant program, and in particular, the way that they break out their grants by category of activity. And we started with the Adopt grant category, which is like you're not modifying, you're just adopting something that's open as is, and you're redesigning your course to use that open content. We started with 9 of those in comparison to 21 grants where people wanted to revise and remix. And to me, that really showed, okay, instructors want to take advantage of the affordances of the open licenses. They want to customize their course materials. But then the number jumped up to 54 Adopt grants, because I got some late-breaking grant money late enough in the biennium where there wasn't time for people to do more involved projects. It was like, no, please just adopt as is, try it out, see how it goes, like revise it later if you need to. And so we got a lot more people involved at that point. And for next time, when I have more grant funding available, I really have liked that rolling grant model. So in other words, instead of spending all of the grant money in a lump and then having to tell people, no, wait 2 years for the next round of grant funding to become available, it's been really nice to be able to have interested faculty say, hey, can I apply for a grant? And say, yes, you can apply for a grant every quarter. So in the future, I'm going to be holding back some of my grant money so that I can have that rolling model. And I also want to talk a little bit about the author and other grants. And if you look down the rows, you'll see that there's less student savings in absolute terms and also in terms of program investment from those bigger projects. So if you're just looking at, so-called ROI, which I'm going to talk more about in a minute, you might say, okay, these bigger projects are not effective ways to spend your money. But I do want to say that they are filling gaps in the available OER, right? Like the only way to get an author grant is to demonstrate that there's not something that already exists that meets your instructional needs. These materials sometimes took a really long time to create so that they didn't get in front of students during the granting period. So we're going to start to see savings as students use these materials. And I think that this student savings per $1 spent is an interesting metric and worth reporting on, but it's also not the only thing that's important when you're evaluating your grant results. So another idea for next time that I just want to share while I'm talking about grants, I want to add a category where instructors can adopt as is and create ancillaries and interactive content where they don't already exist and do that in a shareable way. So whatever that might look like, maybe it's creating a master course shell that other people can adopt. So I'm really looking forward to getting the grant program moving again and applying some of the lessons that I've learned. And then, the last data piece that I want to talk about is impact research. And as I said, it's really important to have somebody that's actually tasked with collecting and analyzing this data because it's a very large undertaking. It's a big responsibility. It's not going to happen unless it's somebody's job to do this. And of course, good data is necessary to help faculty and administrators make good decisions. So I'm going to tell you about a research project that I recently completed, and there's a report on this on the Open Oregon website. And it looks at the cost of textbooks for a complete transfer degree that's 90 credits at each college in Oregon. And this started as a project that was designed by Quill West in Washington State, and it was then refined by Nicole Allen at Spark, which is a group for librarians that are interested in open ed. And the idea is to find, what I did is I found the highest enrollment courses that meet the transfer degree requirements, and then I went shopping at the bookstore to find out what the textbooks would cost to meet those degree requirements. And the best thing actually to come out of this, in addition to the data, of course, is that I got to meet every single one of Oregon's college bookstore managers, and they are such a great bunch. They are totally on the side of student success. They care so much about affordability. They're on the front lines, and they often receive the blame for the high textbook prices that students see, but they don't actually select the materials. That's faculty's job. And the bookstore managers are the ones negotiating with the publishers to get the best possible price, but their hands are tied. So that's been really, really great, and I recommend if you didn't hear Stephen Bell, he gave a guest webinar for Open Oregon about a week ago, and that's now captioned and archived on the website, and he has done some really great research about relationships between bookstore managers and librarians, so really worth checking that out. Okay, so to tell you a little bit about more about my research, it involved a very large number of spreadsheets because I was looking at 17 colleges and 3 degrees per college. And as I said, I looked at the most likely path that a student would take through the degree requirements based on enrollment data provided by the state of Oregon. And so that schedule does not look like a pathway that an individual student would actually take. The schedule might look really weird. It's what students are most likely to take collectively most often, because this is where the cost reductions can have the greatest impact. And then, as I said, I went to each college bookstore's website and I looked up the required cost of textbooks for those courses. If multiple sections of the course were being offered, I always chose section 1. And this is an arbitrary choice. And the reason for it is to account for the fact that students don't always have a lot of flexibility in their schedules, right? Like they have jobs and they have childcare and they have a lot of other obligations that they're juggling. So I wanted to find a way to account for that. And I then recorded both the highest priced and the lowest price available at the bookstore in order to understand what students are facing in more detail. So the highest price is the retail face value, what is the syllabus asking of students? And the lowest price is what can the savvy shopper find at the college bookstore website? Maybe they don't have the ability to retain if that lowest price is a rental, so they're missing one of the 5 R's there. Maybe it's the loose leaf. Some stores include a little comparison to online alternatives like Amazon and Half.com and Chegg. But bookstore prices are really what we need to stay focused on, because that's where student financial aid money can be spent. That's where benefits can be spent, like veterans benefits. So those are really the important prices to stay focused on. And I did not include the possibility of buyback in this research because the students aren't guaranteed to be able to sell their textbooks. If the instructor has moved on to a new book or even a new edition of the same book, the bookstore might not be able to buy back. So that's just not part of this analysis. It's a question that I get asked, so I thought I would just tell you. And what I've described so far is what I did in 2015, and then I repeated that in 2017 because I wanted to have an apples-to-apples comparison. But in 2015, we passed House Bill 2871, which required that schools designate no-cost and low-cost courses in the schedule. And this is Portland Community College schedule. This is what that looks like. Here, it's for Writing 121, and in the right-hand column, you can see a lot of these courses have 0 textbook cost, and the second to last one is low cost. It's less than $40 because that's the low-cost ceiling that PCC chose to use. This is a really nice implementation because it has a search feature where you can filter by low-cost and no-cost courses. I think about 4 of our schools have that feature. So 13 of the 17 colleges had implemented this schedule designation when I was doing the research, and the policy of having the designation in the schedule assumes that students will have some flexibility to make their course selections based on the cost of materials where they can. So I did one more step when I did this research in 2017, where I used the schedule to find the pathway with the lowest cost materials. And again, this makes your schedule look very strange. It's not a pathway that any individual would actually take, but it's a proof of concept to demonstrate the cost savings that are possible when faculty change their course material selections with cost in mind. And my exciting finding is that costs are down over the last 2 years, more than I expected. As I said, the full report is on openoregon.org. I did also give a webinar last week, and once that one's captioned, I'll be sharing it on the website if you'd rather hear me talk about it rather than read the report. But I want to share some of this data with you. So I looked at 3 different degrees: the Associate of Arts Oregon Transfer, and the Associate of Science, and the Associate of Science Oregon Transfer Business. And when you just compare Section 1 to all the required courses, and then Section 1 in 2017, that's the blue bar and the red bar, costs are down by 15 and 16%. in terms of statewide averages. And as I said, that's better than I expected. It's a really great outcome, and it reflects a lot of hard work that's happening in Oregon's colleges. But the really exciting data point here is the little short yellow bar, because that is the lowest cost degree pathway. And so the two findings from 2017 is the red bar, where you always choose section 1, you don't have flexibility in your schedule, and the yellow bar, which is also from 2017, but you assume that you have complete flexibility to choose based on the cost of course materials, and that is a 75% difference. So just consider that you can get through your entire 2-year 90-credit college degree spending a few $100s on textbooks. This is really, really exciting. And it demonstrates the impact of faculty choices and also the importance of making the information available to students at the point that they're choosing their classes so that they have that information going in. And this savings, just looking at section 1 compared to section 1, that savings is enough to offset the tuition hikes that have happened in most of the colleges in the last 2 years. So I'm hoping that administrators might take notice of that, okay, we have to raise tuition because of other pressures, but it could become more palatable for students if they see, hey, there is real energy and real commitment to lowering textbook costs in this other way. So I've been talking for a little while. Let's pause. And for people that like to think before they talk, let's give it 1 minute to take some notes, reflect. Do you have one actionable idea in mind, not necessarily related to what I've said? Do you have questions so far? And then we will turn to our neighbor, but let's really be quiet for just a minute. I can tell you're all itching to talk to each other. So you're released from silence, and I'm going to give you 2 minutes, find a neighbor or two, and share what you've got. Share your questions. We'll do questions in the whole group at the end of the session, so if you can't answer each other's questions, hang on to them, and we'll talk about them at the end. So 2 minutes. Okay, I'm pulling it back, pulling it back. I hate to break it up. These seem like really great conversations. I'll have to continue over break. I love how animated and excited everybody is to talk about this stuff. Okay, so I've been talking about some of our activities in particular from a data perspective because that's how I have a way of showing the impact of Oregon's investment in OER. But now I'm going to shift gears and talk at the state level and the policy level about what's happening. And I'm also going to take a little deeper look at this concept of sustainability that Cable brought up. So, as I mentioned, House Bill 2871 went into effect for our 2015 to 2017 biennium. Do you have bienniums here? Oregon loves to do everything on a biennium. So bear with me, that's just our way of doing things. And so one provision of this first OER bill that we passed was that, as I said, all public colleges and universities are mandated to designate no-cost and low-cost courses in the course schedule. The bill also included money for grants and to hire an OER specialist in addition to my position. And at the end of that previous biennium, I heard a representative on the Education Committee say that that OER bill was the best thing we did in the last legislative session. So that was really nice to hear. And the next OER bill, which is currently in effect, House Bill 2729, passed in a really tough budget climate. It's a $1 million bill, and it passed. So I think the legislature got the message that saving money for students, like there's consensus around that, it's a win-win. And the current bill allocates additional grant money for OER-related activities. And rather than hiring a separate OER specialist, it is very likely going to combine my position in the colleges with also working with Oregon's 7 public universities. That part is not a done deal, but it's looking very likely. And this piece about the schedule designation, it's a statewide mandate. It did not sunset with the previous biennium, and I want to share the language because, to me, this is the most effective thing that the Oregon legislature did. You know, putting the funding towards it is great, but this has been really important. And having it come from the legislature was really important because the people doing the implementation occasionally ran up against resistance on their campuses, and they had cover. They were able to say, no, this is a statewide mandate. We are all in the same boat. It's not just that I want to do this or I'm asking you to do this. Everybody has to do this in order to be in compliance with the law. And as we saw, it is super important for students to have access to this information in the schedule, and they can save hundreds of dollars over the course of their degree. There are also new research questions that we can ask now that we have this course designation data available, which I'm pretty interested in. We haven't started, but I think the burning question for faculty is whether students are actually voting with their feet to register, to be more likely to register in the OER courses that are designated in the schedule. So that will hopefully be on the research docket. And I will also say that, you know, we're not in a system, we don't have central systems or offices to work with. But we were able to some extent work together to share information and ideas as we did the implementation of this because it's really complex. It involves people in departments that don't usually talk to each other, information systems that are not usually compatible. All of these different pieces have to work together to get the information to show up in the course schedule. And in particular, we have 5 schools that use Genzabar as their student information system who realized, oh, it's not actually possible to comply with this mandate the way that Genzabar is currently configured. So they were able to collaborate and split the costs of the programming on Genzabar's back end in order to be in compliance to implement this. So this is, in my opinion, the thing that the state is doing the best from a policy level, and I want to talk about some challenges that we're facing. The first one is timing. Really, to be totally honest, the biggest threat to our OER program is our timing issue when it comes to distributing money. So, like I said, we're really locked into this biennium, and funds from the biennium have to be spent during the biennium. Well, we are 8 months into the current biennium, and 100% of my money has to be spent by June 30th of 2019, but I don't actually have the money in my budget yet. So I'm going to be spending 100% of the money in 65% of the time. Needless to say, this is causing a serious problem with continuity and a lot of stress. So this is my anti-stressor. This is Wendell, and he's also very flexible. State governments, not so flexible. And flexibility is super important with this work because open ed is an emerging field. It's still pretty new, and it's been essential for me to be able to respond to new ideas as they come along. So to give you just one example, I was visiting friends in Minneapolis. I cold called Dave Ernst to see if he would have coffee with me to talk about open ed stuff. He pitched the Open Textbook Network to me, and I came back to Oregon and I talked to my supervisor about it, and I said, this sounds like a really interesting model. I think we should join. So being able to do that, the Open Textbook Network model, I'm not going to steal Dave's thunder because he's going to talk to you tomorrow, but it's been really effective for us. We've saved over $600,000 so far with the Open Textbook Review model, and it's something like $14 in student savings for every program dollar spent. So it's a really effective way to use program money. But I needed to be able to have that flexibility to hear about a new idea and react to it. When the legislature specifies how you should spend your money and pre-allocates it into certain buckets based on what we know about open education right now, you are at risk of losing these kinds of opportunities to try new things and be a little bit entrepreneurial, to use a word that my supervisor likes to use to describe me for some reason. And of course, also some ideas don't work out so well. I've had plenty of ideas that have kind of died in the water, or I tried to get them off the ground and they flopped. And you need space to learn from mistakes. It's really important. And then I'm going to spend some time now talking about sustainability, because in the context of the funding issue that I mentioned just now, I actually think that our biggest challenge is going to be sustainability. But I do say the word sustainability with a grain of salt, because it has some connotations in terms of money and return on investment, and I think we're not always really clear what we mean when we say that something is sustainable, or why that's considered to be the all-important thing for OER. And so, in the context of all the uncertainty and stress that I've been experiencing over the past year, I've had to think about sustainability and what would be a funding model that lets my work continue in a continuous way. So I've been doing some thinking and writing on the OpenOregon.org blog. There are 2 blog posts about sustainability that are up right now that you're welcome to take a look at. And I'm going to think through some of the questions out loud right now. And unfortunately, I'm not coming here with the answers, but maybe we can help each other get some more clarity. So David Wiley has a definition that I really like. He says sustainability will be defined as an open educational resource project's ongoing ability to meet its goals. And what's really nice about this definition is how open it is as to what your goals actually are, because each college is going to look different. So a valid goal could be achieving a certain savings amount per year, or getting from 0 to 1 adoptions, or eliminating your reliance on grant funding. Those are all valid goals depending on your environment. So sustainability is going to look different at different institutions and over time as your goals evolve. And yet, a lot of times when we say sustainability, it's not with that open-ended idea in mind. It's a more narrow definition that's divorced from specific goals. And I'm not saying that anyone here in this room thinks this way, but bear with me while I talk about what the problem is with thinking about sustainability more narrowly. This is an illustration that Nicole Allen made for a concept that Ethan Sinek talks about, the broken textbook model. In a normal market, there's a direct relationship between the producer and the consumer, but in the textbook market, the producers, the publisher, the people who choose the product are the faculty who choose which textbook to assign for their course, but the people that have the burden of paying the price are the students. And this is very similar to what happens in the pharmaceutical industry, and it equally has a problem with sky-high prices where the people who do the choosing aren't the people that actually pay for the product. So it's very clear, in light of this, in light of the issues that Cable talked about, the current model just isn't working because students can't afford the course materials that they need in order to succeed academically. And equally important, we have a huge amount of financial aid money that's flowing through students to the textbook companies, and then along the way, there's a diversion to some bookstore revenue and then some contribution to the general fund along the way. And that is not going to be a sustainable way to keep our general fund solvent, right? Like artificially high textbook prices are not the way to keep the general fund going. So here is another loop to consider. And I made this to try to think through my problem with return on investment as a description of the impact of OER programs. So with a normal investment, there's a direct relationship between the investor and their portfolio. The returns come back to the investor. But in the case of OER, you've got your funder, public or private, and they grant money, and faculty put in a lot of effort to adopt open resources or create open resources where they don't already exist. And then the savings get passed along to the student. And then at that point, the money invested leaves the loop altogether because students are going to buy food, they're going to buy gas or pay for housing or childcare or whatever else it is that they need to support their lives. Maybe they'll pay more tuition, as we'll see in a minute. But no wonder OER doesn't seem sustainability in the sense of closing the loop, right? Because the benefits are leaving the loop. So there are a few self-support models that we are starting to see emerge. And this is my favorite bridge in Portland where I live. It's the Fremont Bridge. Most people will say their favorite is the St. John's Bridge, but let's give the Fremont Bridge a chance. So David Wiley and his colleagues are doing some interesting work right now showing how OER might close that investment loop, because if student enrollment and retention can increase as a direct result of student savings through OER, then schools will see increased revenue and will have to refund less tuition for dropped courses. And there's a couple of articles out right now about that idea. And there's another worthwhile model being piloted by Brian Linshield and Rebel Cummings-Sauls at Kansas State University, where students pay a fee to enroll in courses that adopt open and alternative textbooks. And part of the fee revenue goes back to the OER initiative to support even more course conversions, and this creates a virtuous cycle. And we see similar models in public-private partnerships. So for example, schools that work with Lumen Learning to help implement open education, part of the student fee goes back to Lumen for their work hosting and consulting and supporting the OER program, but part of the fee stays with the initiative at the campus to maintain current courses and develop new ones. So these are a few models that fit that narrow definition of sustainability, but they assume that sustainability depends on new revenue to support the new work of OER in order to close the loop. And I have a former librarian colleague at Portland State University, Bob Schroeder, who says this is bigger than the loop. So let's take a giant step sideways for a second and just think that for an OER initiative to succeed, we need to see improvements in teaching and learning. That's actually what we need to focus on, because if you just take your expensive textbook and swap it with the open textbook, and you're not going to do a good course redesign and you're not going to look at your learning objectives, your students might not do any better than before. If they fail and they have to repeat the course, they didn't save any money. They have to pay the tuition twice. The campus doesn't benefit from any of that like OER goodness either. It's kind of a lose-lose when that happens. So let's just set aside OER for a second and think about good course design, which is where we're going to see the impact on student success. A growing body of evidence shows that good design includes the use of open content because it lowers student costs, it's fully customizable, we can pool our resources to make the content accessible, and it encourages innovative pedagogy. So, the pragmatist, of course, everybody is worried about costs and finding funding to pay for this really good work because Open Ed offers this exciting way to realize our existing long-standing goals. And it does cost money to do this. Faculty need to be paid for their work. It's a lot of work to redesign your course for any reason, whether you're going open or you're doing an accessibility review or you're taking it online, whatever it is. Faculty need to be recognized and they need to be compensated for their work. We can't just squeeze this into our already full plates. And I know this is in particular a problem for librarians that often leads to burnout. So we don't want that outcome. And I think revenue from student fees and student retention is going to be part of the answer, but actually I think the bigger driver in the long run is going to be culture change. And it is the long run. It's not a fast fix. So as Table mentioned, as long as OER seems to be something new that we have to add on to what we already do with new funding, it's going to seem to need its own siloed funding source to support it. But if we consider it part of what we already do, because what we already do is student success, this is why we come to work in the morning, then, we don't want to say we can't afford good course design. We don't want to say we can't afford student success, right? This is what we do. So as Wiley's definition of sustainability suggests, we can broaden the scope of the goals that we decide are worthwhile. Proving that OER meet a narrow definition of sustainability just by paying for itself directs the conversation away from the more important issue of student success. And tangible returns are just one facet of this work. So my time is about up, and I want to leave you with a question. So to repeat Wiley's definition of sustainability, he says, sustainability will be defined as an open educational resource project's ongoing ability to meet its goals. What are your goals? How do you want to sustain them? And we do have some time for questions, and this is how to contact me. I'm very happy to talk to people and, give me a call or drop me a line. Open Oregon is on Twitter with an underscore. So there's an Open Oregon without the underscore, and they get really grouchy when people try to contact me that way. So don't do that. Yeah.
Going back to some of what Gable Green said earlier about the equity issues in OER, helping with those issues, I was wondering if you have been looking at anything in terms of the course catalog and publishing the courses and offering and targeting these groups that need that extra special help to get the lower cost courses.
That's a really good question, and it's certainly a nice possibility. I know that at Klamath Community College, they have a program specifically for military service members that was looking at making all of their courses open. So, that's an example of how you could do that kind of work. From an equity standpoint, one of the other really exciting things that I'm interested in is how open educational practices can make our course materials more inclusive and bring in more different voices, including student voices, so that there's really more a feeling of representation in our course materials. Thank you for asking that. Other questions? Yeah.
Mine is related to 2871. What would you say to those of us in the, at least second stage universities in the state of Florida, where we have all that supervisors in the middle that control the textbook adoption data? We don't know when a faculty member adopts it or when it passes textbook because it's coded as no textbook required. We don't know if that's a library book or there is no textbook. So what has to happen in Florida to be able to support 2871?
That's a really, really good question. And I would, again, refer you to the work of Stephen Bell. He's a librarian at Temple University who's been doing some really interesting research about where bookstores fit into OER programs. His finding so far is that chain bookstores aren't necessarily harder or easier to work with than independent or nonprofit stores. So part of it just starts to be building those relationships and understanding how your bookstore works on your campus. And, I think bookstores do tend to feel misunderstood. So being willing to reach out and start small and start informal to build the relationship. But I have heard horror stories where people say, like, oh, we have a chain bookstore and they say that the adoption data is proprietary and they own it and they won't give it to us. Looking at bookstore data dumps is often a really interesting first step to try to find out what's happening on your campus. And if someone says no textbook required, maybe you have some person power to reach out to those faculty members and say, how did you not adopt the textbook? In some cases, you might find a copyright violation is behind that. You might find that library resources are being used. You might find that it's open. You might find that it's a course pack. So the bookstore data is pretty key. And I would just encourage you to remember that we're all on the same side. We all need our students to succeed. If students can't afford the textbooks, then the bookstore isn't going to have any customers. There are real impacts to the bookstore revenue, and we need to be aware of that in a holistic way, but just to sort of remember that we're all on the same side. Yeah.
Going back to your work in sustainability loop, has anyone looked at the model just really looking at revenue, especially for publicly funded education? We already measure gains in income from education. We talk about reduced time completion through OER, taking barriers away. And there's a lot of talk about an educated citizen will be drawing for companies, better employers, better wages, which means more tax income, less dependence on public services, all of that. So it seems like those numbers are already out there, and you can close that loop just by looking at it from that angle.
I totally agree. I'm not an economist, but somebody else could certainly do that analysis. And at the same time, I think that we don't fund, we fund public education because there's going to be those benefits that you talked about, like, increased tax revenue for the state, et cetera. But those are sort of indirect. I think that there are more ethical reasons that we fund public education that don't have to do with the ROI as well. So I would just encourage you all to keep that kind of ROI conversation open to these other considerations that have to do with, the ROI and the dollars returned are important, and there's also these other benefits that are going to be less tangible. Other questions? Okay, I think we have a break. Thank you.